All right, my name is Mark Gardner. I'm a half-time Education Association president in Camas. I'm also a Marzano framework trainer for our principals and a new teacher mentor, and so I'm all over the place. But Camas, speaking of all over the place, is down in the corner. We're practically in Oregon, and the mountain in our logo is actually an Oregon mountain. So I want to share with you the way that I think about evaluator interrater reliability. And the best analogy that I can think of actually was after I was talking to my 9-year-old son when we were going on a fishing trip to learn how to identify what kind of fish to keep and what kind to throw back. And so maybe some of you can already extend the analogy. And so when I think about supporting principal learning around interrater reliability, sometimes we're learning how to point at something and say what it is. So we watch a classroom video where we walk into a classroom, a real life classroom, and we point at a framework aligned practice. Or we might point at things that are not, because we also need to know what it is not when we think about learning in our framework. And that is how we often begin our conversations around interrater reliability. So now we deepen our learning about what kind of fish we're pointing at by understanding all the little pieces and parts. And then we further deepen our understanding. What do we know? What can we identify as that's not a trout? And be careful when you unhook that one. It's the same with that one, also not a trout. So this whole process of learning how to pick out the things that we are looking for, they're at opposite ends, so we're safe. We learn how to pick out the things that we're looking for and say that is a trout. So often that feels like where interrater reliability stops. We are pointing at the practices, but we've armed these evaluators with this knowledge. They can point at those practices and say this is what it is. So we send them off, and some of them go there, and they're going to find some amazing trout, and others, to go apply their learning, go somewhere completely different. And so they might have the knowledge, but have we really prepared them to use that knowledge in a way that cultivates teacher growth? So without even realizing we were doing this over the last 5 years, we've been thinking about how to support principals' knowledge, skills, and dispositions. And if that may sound familiar, because that's from the C-STEP teacher leadership framework. But it's about how do we cultivate the ability to identify the practices, but then the skills to go to the right place and the dispositions to draw it out. And so it starts with that knowledge of the instructional framework and continually reconnecting with the knowledge again and again. But then also thinking about those listening and questioning skills, the coaching strategies that in that face-to-face conversation can help draw out the reflection from teachers, but also the dispositions that need to happen in order for that to occur. So we also have this idea of ecosystems thinking in our district, that these things that we do, the evaluator training isn't an isolated niche. It's also part of these greater conditions within our system. And so we have spent a lot of time thinking about those knowledge, skills, and dispositions and the conditions that have to be present for those things to grow. So if you come to our workshop a little bit later, you're going to learn about some of the structural supports that we have in place, the dedicated time and resources that we use to support and scaffold up principal learning, and how by prioritizing those, we are creating the conditions for learning. We also, on top of the structures, have those learning and process supports. So we might have time and resources, but we know that if the learning isn't facilitated effectively, the learning's not going to transfer into practice. So workshops, learning labs, protocols, even coaching. And it's interesting to have the union president come coach an evaluator on how to have an evaluation conversation. It's kind of a great opportunity, actually. And we think about the social, emotional, and cultural supports that are necessary. These are personal interactions. And so how do we cultivate the environment so that those personal interactions are safe and the vulnerability can be shared? And it starts with knowing yourself as well. And how do we cultivate those things? And then last, and this is, of all of them, I think this is the one we're still really working on with our principals, is how to foster learner ownership and agency. And in this case, our principals are our learners. How do we foster their ownership of this work and their sense of agency, that this work is authentic, that this work is relevant, and it's what they need? We all know that teaching is incredibly complex work. There are so many nuances and so many hidden things that happen inside a teacher's head, but similarly, evaluating teaching is incredibly complex work. And in order for us to be able to make this happen effectively, and so that isn't an unsat or sat checkbox like we saw in our keynotes earlier, we have to be thinking about the conditions we create the supports that we provide to our evaluators. And interrater reliability is no longer just about pointing to a practice and all pointing at the same thing. It's how do we do the work to apply our learning with those skills and dispositions. Thank you.